Hola, welcome to Season 3 of More Than Rice and Beans, the Mother-Son podcast where we introduce you to our favorite Latinx creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs.
I'm Miguel, a mechanical engineer PhD student at Johns Hopkins University, funded by a NASA fellowship.
And I'm his mom, Tania. I'm a chef, educator, and proud Nuyorican.
This season on More Than Rice and Beans, we've got, well, a lot more for you. More amazing guests, more ridiculous sidebar conversations, and more meaningful discussions on what it's like to navigate this world as a Latinx person.
We're so excited you're joining us for this incredible season, along with our all-star lineup of guests. Get ready, because this time it's way more than rice and beans. Our guest today is Manolo Lopez. He has a long list of careers. He is a chef, producer, activist, speaker, and entrepreneur. He founded the company Mo-fon-go at a young age, with the aspirations of sharing Puerto Rican culture and its history through food. Bienvenidos, Manolo.
Muchas gracias. Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me today.
I met you in 2017 at the Brooklyn Commissary Kitchen when you first started out with mofongo. I have to say, I'm very impressed, and I've been following your journey ever since. So, what is mofongo, and what does it mean to you?
First of all, yes, I think we met earlier. I think it was 2014 at Hana Kitchens, the commissary. It's not there, sadly, but those spaces were, they gave birth to so many different concepts in New York, and I always have to shout it out because for small businesses, it was so important. I remember running around with plantains and I would catch you and you're like, hey, you're Puerto Rican? Yeah, me too. And then, we got to talk and that's how, and now we're doing a podcast. So yeah, but everything started in 2014. I think for me, mofongo is much more than a dish that unites the Caribbean, but also unites the diaspora. It's a dish that was handed down from our West African ancestors and then actualized in the Caribbean with the indigenous and with the Spanish. But I think what it really means is family, right? And it's our way of saying this is our soul food. When I decided to make mofongo in New York, I did it just out of the necessity of missing it. Being born and raised on the island, you overlook all those things that you had because you have this perception that is instilled in you that everything that's happening up north is better than where you're at. And it was only till I moved to New York that I understood that that was incorrect. I was missing and yearning the island so much. And for me, it was just about landing in the right place at the right time, this neighborhood called Loisaida, and then understanding that there was a whole different culture of Puerto Ricans and diasporicans that had happened there that I had not understand. And it was only till I got there that, and I tell this freely to everyone, I learned to be Puerto Rican when I moved to New York, because that pride that Puerto Ricans in New York have is just something amazing and beautiful that I never felt on the island, because you're there, right? Because the goal is something bigger, right? But that is what's bigger. It's so big that you can't even see it at the moment. But I guess that's what mofongo is to me, that memory, that reminiscing of family soul food and how it ties our cultures together.
And you spell mofongo differently for your business, right?
When I started playing with the idea, I knew that I wanted to do something that tied back to Puerto Rican food, but I wanted to do it in a different way. And I'd never seen mofongo as a finger food. Traditionally, you would get your pilon at a restaurant and you would sit down and eat it, and it would take like an hour because the thing is so big. And I wanted to do something where we created it to be consumed on the go. And that's how Mo-fon-go started. It was just a play on words. It was just a play on words, and it was a brand that I just designed for street food in New York. And slowly but surely, I was looking for the right platform to launch it. Because at that point, I went to SBA, the Small Business Administration in New York, and got orientated and said, I want to start a restaurant. I have all these ideas. I have this fire in my belly. But the reality was that they shut me down saying like, look, kid, 84% of restaurants fail within the first year in New York. And after that, half of them close within 5 years. Like, and right now, like the rent is too crazy and you're not going to get a spot in a popular neighborhood with foot traffic. So basically, they told me everything that I needed to fix to get in order for it to be successful. And that's how the platform Smorgasburg came about. At that point in time, Smorgasburg had just started because it evolved from Brooklyn Flea Market in Williamsburg into its own little food market. And the reason why I knew it was going to be successful was because there was an article by the New York Times stating that the 5 best barbecues in New York, 4 of them were brick and mortar restaurants, and one was a 10 by 10 tent in Smorgasburg called Mighty Q's. And I understood that there was going to be a shift in the trends of food as far as food trucks moving into outdoor food markets. So instead of playing with the idea of a brick and mortar and then playing with the idea of a food truck, I said I could definitely do a 10 by 10 tent where I could create one product, cut down on costs, cut down on all these other factors that would not make the product well and focus on one thing. And I narrowed it down to mofongo because it connected our people and because I just could not find something that was reminiscent of what I ate growing up.
How was it accepted with the community?
Well, it was amazing. It was truly, we had beautiful signs made with minimalistic design. We didn't use chef coats. We used custom guayaberas that I designed and we made. And we also used aprons that had messages and embroidery that took us back to Puerto Rico. And we would take your order in Spanish and we would blast Hector Lavoe and Ruben Blades and Fania all
I gotta
day.
say huepa here. Huepa!
And we were just very unapologetic. We knew we had a good product. We knew we understood branding and we knew that there was a big opportunity. I went to business school in Puerto Rico. I went to design school in New York at NYU. And I merged both of those skills in order to create something that was very different from what you saw those times at food markets. Everybody had $100 pop-up tents from Home Depot or Costco, and they would just write their menu down by hand on papers and stuff like that. And when we came out, I think the idea was, all right, we're always overlooked, right? Latinos, like we were always told that we cannot compete in specific markets because we don't have certain skills. And that was like the challenge right there. I was like, no, I'm going to make this the best food tent out. And I want people to understand from the moment that we come out that we look like we have a brick and mortar and this is just like a satellite that we're doing. So, we had branded tents to become the best food market tent with all those elements. So that's how we came in, and the community was so excited when we came out because we were in Williamsburg, close to Los Sures, which was a predominant Puerto Rican area, which now, because of gentrification, like you don't have that. So in a sense, it became that little space of retaking what was ours, right? Retaking our culture. And I even heard some people say like, yo, this gives us hope because of the way that we came out. Mofongo was such a big thing. I never understood how big it was, even throughout the 5 years that we worked that project, because I was so consumed in the moment. But Mofongo ended up doing the first pop-up in Japan, in Osaka. And this is the
Yeah, I
first
was about
time.
to ask you about that because I remember when you put it up on Facebook that you were in Japan. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Mofongo in Japan. You definitely had to tell us a story about this.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that for me, again, going back to just always thinking, okay, this is the next step. This is the next step. I was just consumed in the moment. But when the opportunity came to do a pop-up in Osaka, it was because I thought I made Mofongo for our people, for our community, which I did, right? It was just centered on what would Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Mexicans, Latinos feel about this modern interpretation of a Caribbean dish. And then the interesting part was that apart from getting that support from our community, we had so much support from the Asian community. It was just insane. And they would come and take videos and post them, and they would write articles, and I could not even read them because they were in Japanese and all these things.
Wow.
And one day we just had like a group of executives just pull up, and I remember we had like 70 people in line, and we were pretty quick because we would do 300 to 400 orders a day in a 7 hour span. And they're like, we want to do a pop-up with you in Japan. And I just started laughing because I'm like, I'm from Aguala, Puerto Rico. Like, I grew up on a farm, right? And now I'm in New York, the most complicated place on earth for many reasons. And then now I have, a little small business that's doing well. And now I'm getting attention to do a pop-up in Japan. Like, what is going on? But yeah, it took us around 2 years to actually make that happen because, as you know, like, there's no plantains in Japan. We had to figure out how to source it. And then we started sourcing from Thailand and Vietnam, and then learned that the temperatures would ripen the plantains quicker if they weren't transported in refrigerated containers. It was just like a whole thing. And then it's an email chain with translators in Japanese and in Vietnamese and Thai. And it's just like, it took a long time, but we made it out there. And to my surprise, this is 2015? I want to say it was like around 2016. The interesting part about it is that at that moment there wasn't no Despacito. Like, people didn't know what Puerto Rican was. Like they couldn't you couldn't put it on a map. Yeah, like, what is the point of reference to Puerto Rico outside of Jennifer Lopez and Ricky Martin at the time,
Oh, yeah.
if they even knew, right? So yeah, we made it out there, and everybody was just like, "You think we're gonna sell anything?" I was like, "Well, we're here. Let's just figure it out. And if we don't, like, it's an experience. If we do, we do." First day, we end up selling 400 orders of mofongo. I just like
No.
couldn't believe.
Wow.
Yeah, apparently they had done a lot of press for this event. It was a festival called 10 Days in New York, and they brought the Brooklyn Brewery, they brought the ramen burger guys, they brought all these different brands that created like this little ecosystem in Osaka, and it was awesome. And before we were going to open at 10 a.m., we had a line, and we felt like rock stars, honestly, because I just didn't understand what was going on. I was like, is somebody giving out free vouchers? I just didn't understand. But the power of press and social media, which had already taken off at that moment, gave us an edge out there. And for 10 days, we did 400 orders a day. And we did 4,000 mofongos in Osaka, where I didn't even think people were going to know. But Asians are very receptive to different types of cuisines, and that played a big part. The amazing thing was, that was a big deal back home in Puerto Rico, that there is this young chef with his business, and they were going to do a pop-up, and Nuevo Dia, which is the largest newspaper on the island, wrote about it, and people freaked out, and the article went viral, and people couldn't believe it. And then they asked me some questions, and I'm like, look, if there's any Latinos out there, like, please send this to them and let them know that they're going to eat for free. And there was one gentleman who took around like 3 trains and buses for around 4 hours, Puerto Rican guy who was doing his master's in some university. I can't even remember the city that he was in, but he traveled 4 hours by train to come and eat. And he stayed the whole day with us. He's like, I'm going to have lunch here and I'm going to have dinner. So I'm going to like eat and go walk and come back. So please save me one. And yeah, so every Puerto Rican, Dominican, that there was a lot, and Mexican that came through, they ate for free. Because I just thought, like, how amazing is it that our people can travel anywhere in the world and adapt? And now we're traveling to Osaka and adapting our dish out here. So
How long did you
it was
stay
just,
there?
I stayed a month because I traveled through Japan after. I was not going to miss that opportunity. We came in
It's a
about like,
16-hour flight, so it would be pretty crazy if you didn't do anything beyond that. And it's really
yeah,
expensive too.
yeah. I mean, once you're there, it's pretty easy to move around, and we had costed everything out to have everything else that we were going to do. So we ended up traveling for about, I think it was like 13 days through Kyoto, Tokyo, through some beautiful places and just eating at places that we had only read about in books and seen through Anthony Bourdain's travels. And we were there, and like it gave us like this sort of hope that we were moving in the right direction. And that was like one of like the great parts about building Mofongo, right? I think I'll share another memorable moment, because we did pop-ups in the craziest places in New York where you could think of. We did it, right? But one of the craziest things that we did was we did a pop-up at the Intrepid Museum. So that's like the huge ship, right? The army ship that's on the west side. So they asked us to do a pop-up there. There was like 10 other food tents as well. We were the only ones that were Latino. And the interesting part about food markets is the barter system, right? You go up to different tents like, hey, I got this. You want to trade and stuff like that. But we started getting so big that we were bartering with DJs, right? For like music. So I'm like, hey, they would come and they're like, yo, they would see the line. We ain't doing the line, and like, we need 4 mofongos. And I was like, yeah, if you, for the next 30 minutes, you play like my playlist, which was just salsa music. Yeah, like you get it right now. And they're like, bet, here it is. So at one point, we're on the Intrepid Museum. We have like a line of 60, 70 people. The whole team was Puerto Rican that day. It was 6 of us. All of a sudden, Celia Cruz and like Willie Colon start blasting. People start dancing salsa on the ship. People are eating mofongo. And like that moment, I remember I stopped because, because of our colonial status and our relationship with the US is so difficult. It's been one that we've never had a fair shake. That moment in time felt like we were the ones colonizing them, right? In a sense where we were colonizing them with our culture, and we were doing it on a ship that had gone, I don't know, was it Japan, Hiroshima, wherever it was that represents something of death, we were representing something of life there. And that's when I knew that the business wasn't just, a food business. It meant something different. It meant something more. And that's why I love those moments. Those are New York moments that I tell people, and people are like, did it really happen? Or I'm like, man, if you can't take my word for it, I can't tell you any of the other stories. You'll never even think of things that happened to us in different scenarios, positive and negative ones, but that ultimately shaped who we were in the city of New York and our take on Puerto Rican food at that moment.
So what age were you when you first started Mofongo?
I was 26.
Oh my God. Super young, ready to go, ambitious and hungry. Love it.
Literally hungry. Because it was
Yeah.
And then actually, since you were talking earlier about like needing a creative outlet when coming out of Puerto Rico and your entire family needing that, was cooking always going to be that creative outlet for you, or did that just come about randomly?
I was going to figure out how to segue to it, but you just set me up. I started cooking at the age of like 11, and it was because of my mother, Margarita. That age of 11, that's when you hit puberty and you start going, like, I had a really nasty attitude. I started doing bad in school and stuff like that. And my mother, who's like the person who nurtured our whole family, she's the heart of our family. She used the kitchen as the nucleus to fix every single problem that happened in our house. If there was a heartache at 8 years old, you were heartbroken, that was discussed there. If there was like a financial thing happening, it was discussed there. If there was a trip happening, or whatever, was always discussed there through her food. That was her love language to us. And at that point in time, she's like, well, I have this kid who just has energy, and we need to, change it, shift it towards something positive. At that moment, the only culinary school was in San Juan, La Escuela Hotelera de San Juan, the culinary school, the hotel school of San Juan. And it was before the express road was made. So it was about like a 3-hour drive from where we were at. And my mom she called for about a month, like, hey, I have this kid. I want to enroll him into culinary school, but he's 12 years old at the moment. what can we do? And they're like, no, we don't take children like that. And my mom was persistent and she kept on calling. And then like, they're like, man, one day they're like, you need to stop calling. We spoke with the board. If you bring us a signed affidavit, and if you're here in person, then he can come. So it's like a waiver, liability waiver that needed to be certified, plus my mother needed to be there. Plus on top of that, we needed to drive 3 hours to San Juan on weekends. And my mom said yes. And that was one of the gifts that she gave us. Like, my mother never said no to any of those things. And I remember I went to culinary school and I failed hardly because, you know, people think that cooking is going to culinary school and, doing that type of career is just cooking and putting things in the fire. No, there's so much more to it. And it's very interesting how that developed. And I went to that for 2 years. Every Saturday, my mom would drive me. And that's where I learned the basics of Puerto Rican and international cooking. After that, I went to business school. I still cooked, but mom thought it was just a phase. But then when I moved to New York, it was difficult for me on the first year to connect with people, especially at NYU, where you're just like going to classes and coming out. You need to get a part-time job. And, I'm finding myself within like these 8 million stories in my identity. And then I land in the Lower East Side and I start learning about social movements like the Young Lords. And I start learning about the history of Puerto Rico on the island and in the diaspora and all these migrational patterns and all these things. And then all of a sudden, like, a cookbook lands in my lap and I'm like, with all this newfound glory, I should just start doing dinners and share this with all my friends, which were about 4 at the moment. But I started doing underground dinners in New York. This is before Instagram, right? This is like Facebook was starting off. Like, you didn't even check it like you do every day. So we started doing these pop-up dinners in the outer boroughs and tiny apartments, and would invite people to come in. And at the beginning, no one came. So it was just a lot of food left and everybody packing for work or class. And then all of a sudden, the next one happened and it was 5 people. And then the next one happened, it was 10 people, 20, 30, 40, 60. All of a sudden, we're doing 2 shifts in one apartment a night, right? From 6 to 8 and then from 8 to 10 in order to accommodate everyone. And then we were basically running an illegal restaurant in New York. So I already knew that we had something special, that there was a need for it in New York, right? So, Mo-fon-go was clearly the next move after that. So that's how it started. And from my dad's side, my dad was an entrepreneur. He had the biggest furniture manufacturing factory in the Caribbean, in Aguada. So that was just like the family business for so long. But he pushed me so much as a kid to do business, not in a sense where like, oh, you have to do this. It was like, he knew that since I was a little kid, selling Pokemon cards in 4th grade and coming home with $100, and my mom questioning where I got that money. And I was just trying to tell her that I was selling Pokemon cards. My dad really supported that. He's like, hey, that's great. And then he'd be like, are you reinvesting it? Are you getting more cards? Which are the cards that are you? So since I was
He got really into it. He wanted to start his own Pokemon card trading business.
he liked it because we all have our personalities, right? We're all very extroverted. And then, yeah, I just really got into it. By the time that I was 14, 15, we had like a large backyard in the house that we grew up, and I wanted to throw parties there. And I started throwing reggaeton parties there. And I grew to getting 400 or 500 kids from my school paying $3 or $4 the entrance. And, we created experiences. And then my dad really loved that.
We're going to move on to a topic that can be a little bit more touchy. As many people know, Hurricane Maria was pretty devastating to our island. But Manolo here was a light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of people. So could you talk a bit about like what you did in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria? What inspired you to do it too?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Mofongo was in his 4th, 5th year at the moment, entering its 5th year. And, we were just trying to figure out what was the next step for the business. And then, on September 20th, 2017, Puerto Rico was hit with a Category 4 hurricane. destroying 95% of the island's power grid and infrastructure. I credit like specific moments in my life that have shifted my career and my life and perception on many things, and that was definitely one of them. My whole family at the moment was on the island, and then not being able to talk to them and just seeing all the images from the news media outlets on how devastating it was. And I had been on the island 2 weeks prior to that because my father had a heart attack, and it was his third, and it was very serious. And so I was there. Hurricane Irma had just passed and missed us and hit Cuba. And then my dad's like, "Don't worry, I'm gonna be okay. I'm just gonna rest." And I was like, "I have to go to New York to handle some business, but I'll come back in a week or two." And he's like, "All right, I'll see you then." So it was very hard for our family first because we were going through that health scare again, but then it just catapulted into the hurricane. And I think those are the moments that really have defined my life. Like I said, I was asked the day after to speak in El Banco Popular, close to Grand Central Terminal, where they had a bunch of community leaders. Just come up and give some words of support to the community. There was fundraising, there was a bunch of stuff happening. And, they asked me to say stuff. And I usually come prepared for things like this, but my mind wasn't running the right way. And like all my heart would say was like, you have to go back. So when I got on stage to talk to the audience, I just said, look, I cook. This is what I do. I know there's going to be a lot of issues with food security down there. If there's anyone that can get us, I'm willing to shut down my business in New York and go down there. And as I'm walking off the stage, some executives from JetBlue pulled me aside and they're like, "We can get you on a flight tomorrow." It took us a few more days. Then that I started liquidating things. So I sold about 8 fryers that I could get cash for. I sold my work van because I could get cash for anything that I could liquidate in 3 days. I did. We just knew that we were going to have to figure it out when we got there. So it ended up being around 8 of us that went to Puerto Rico on a humanitarian flight. I remember being in the flight and the whole thing is empty. It's just us 8 military personnel and some doctors. And I remember just coming down in San Juan as we're going to land in Carolina and Luis Muñoz Marin, and just looking at it, and it looked as though a bomb had exploded there. And everyone started crying at that moment. And I knew that it's okay to cry, but we're here also to do, we can't let this sorrow like overwhelm us right now. We're here on a mission, right? And the mission is to cook for people. So we landed, quickly did a partnership with the St. George Children's Hospital. So we doubled our efforts, not just bringing and cooking warm food on site, but bringing a group of doctors and medical attendants and medicine to different areas. So our brigades were 30, 40 people deep. We did that for about 2 months, every day. Maybe there was a day of break in between. And then after 2 months of being out there, we were all physically drained, mentally, emotionally drained, because it wasn't just about cooking and just sending a plate. Like, people needed someone to talk to, someone to hug, someone to cry on. And that was us. Here you go, like 8 young kids, cooks and chefs. And now we have this huge brigade. And, we're also giving emotional support to people, stuff that we didn't know how to handle that situation. I thought it was just going to be 2-3 months in Puerto Rico, come back to New York, think about where Mo-fon-go is going to go. But like, what I didn't understand was that coming out of that situation, my whole life had changed. My relationship with food had changed. I started getting asked to speak around the world, and they would take us to these lavish dinners, and people were not being mindful of their consumption. And then you're like, I just came from a place where we had no food, right? And we were trying to make anything from what we had. And like, the reality in different parts of the world is not what we live. And that happens a lot in Latin America, where the realities that happen out there are overlooked by everyone else. And then I started thinking about that, and then all of a sudden I didn't even want to cook anymore. Like, what am I really doing here? What is what is my real terrestrial mission? Like I got to that point, at 31, and I was just like, there has to be something bigger. I felt that I wasn't being true to myself if I went back to New York to restart the project. And it was a project that I loved dearly, but at that moment I needed to do something bigger than myself.
So on your website, you mentioned that you had actually a really, really bad experience with one of your first speeches that you did. What made it so bad that inspired you to try to change it?
Yeah, oh my God. Usually I suck at everything I do at the beginning and I have to fail in order for me to get that challenge to do it way better. And then when I focus and zone in on that, I make it the best. I already know myself. I try not to go into that space where I'm like, oh yeah, I can wing it. I don't do that anymore. But at that time in my life I did. So I got asked to speak in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico about the relief efforts for Dead Talks, which is a subsidiary of TED Talks. I was also cooking a big dinner there for the Day of the Dead festival. I was just focused on the dinner. And they're like, oh, yeah, they want you to talk and they want you to talk about your relief efforts and stuff like that. It's 17 minutes, just like a TED Talk. And I'm like, great, yeah, I'll do it. When I get there, it's a full blown auditorium, right? Like I'm talking about hundreds of people, if not in like the thousands. And I get to the backstage and there's people with speaking coaches, with presentations, with props. And they're like, it felt like a crazy competition that was happening. I don't know what was going on. And I walked in like with my chef bag in Jordans and camouflage pants and like a guayabera. And I'm like, where am I? And I set myself up for failure because I was like, I'll just go out there and speak from my heart. Like, I didn't even have the time. Point is, I give the talk and I'm looking at the monitors in the stage. This is the first time I see monitors that you can read. The audience doesn't read it. And there's one with a clock. And I'm like, almost at 15 minutes, I'd not gone through half of the story. I'm like, what the hell am I? So I bombed by 17. They're like, I had to wrap it up. Thank you. And receive some sort of, pity applause for just going up there. But like people were serious about it. They had amazing talks that in 17 minutes, they could tell this whole story and grab the heart of an audience. And I was like, that I did not do that. And I remember just being like, I walked off stage and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, you're the only Puerto Rican here and you have such a big responsibility to your people and to yourself to be prepared for all these moments. And you can't just show up and then do this. And I just that stirred everything in me. And a really great friend of mine, Andres Felipe, is a public speaker and an entrepreneur. And I told him what happened. He's like, "Oh, I'll help you design the talk. But first you got to read all these books." And one of the books that he threw onto me was The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. We're going to do a hero's journey of your life. The only thing is that we're not going to create it because you've already had it. We're just placing it into here. There's this kid from Puerto Rico who is problematic kid at school and is going through puberty. All of a sudden, he gets thrown into an adventure, which is culinary school. And then there is guide, a mystical and celestial guide who comes to help. And that's my mother. Then after that, the first challenge comes, and that's New York. And then New York, you grow everything. And then there's a fallout. The fallout is the hurricane. What happens with that? Well, you build all this to try and like make a dent into what happened to Puerto Rico, and you come back and it's full circle coming back to Puerto Rico. So we develop a story and a factual story with things that had happened in my life. And then I started getting asked to speak in all the Ivy schools here in the US, and I killed it. I don't want to be, I don't want to like just big myself up or like to my own horn. But the reality is that when you're focused, whether it's cooking, speaking, producing, anything that you do, and you go into it with the confidence that you've done your homework, you're going to do great, because these are general topics that are always going to hit to people. Like, not everyone is going to have the Puerto Rican, Nuyorican experience, or not everyone's family is going to go through such a hard situation like a natural disaster, like a hurricane. But there are underlying topics in there that people will understand. They'll understand love. They'll understand pain. They'll understand happiness. They'll understand sorrow. And those are specific points that we've added into the way that we use tone and the way that we segue from one topic to another to make sure that this touches with people, because somebody's definitely gone through some sort of trials and tribulations of that life. So, I finished the talk telling people, it's like, for me, my challenge was the hurricane. For you, it could be something else. For you, it could be a non-curable disease. For you, it could be many other things, but it's the way that we stand in front of that hurricane that defines who we are.
I just want to say that just listening, talking about how you evolved from public speaking, I was really engaged in how you learned the journey. Like I was listening to you and I can feel your passion. I can feel your heart and what happened with Hurricane Maria and how you grew from that. I felt like in many ways I grew from Hurricane Maria too, because I felt helpless. I felt like I couldn't do anything for my family. And my family would call me and say, I have no water. I have no food. And that broke my heart. I was just crying because I couldn't go there. I couldn't give them what they needed. And then when the moment came when my grandmother died because of Hurricane Maria, I said, I have to go. And when I was there, my heart fell. Like I couldn't understand. Like I couldn't believe what was going on. It's like, is this even possible? It's like everything is gone. And my grandmother is gone. And I was like, I have to do something. I want to, give back wherever way I can. And I came up with this fundraiser called Share a Heart for Puerto Rico, where I had a lot of kids come over and they did activities and cards to send to kids in the orphanage in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. And we sent these cards to them. We gave them money to buy Pampers, everything they needed. And I felt like, okay, I'm doing something. I'm giving back. But my heart always felt broken because I felt like I lost something very special and someone who could have lived a couple of more years, and it was just taken away. So I can definitely relate what you went through, and my heart goes to you. And I wish that I could tell the story the same way you told your story. So whoever taught you how to public speak, send them over, because I want to be able to give my story too.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about your grandmother. I keep getting asked this, and I think it's very important. People are like, who helped Puerto Rico in that moment? It wasn't the government. It was the diaspora. It was the people in North America and other places that did big gestures, small gestures in order to do that. And if it wasn't for the diaspora, Puerto Rico would have never recovered. And that's it.
Vamos a hablar de comida. In the podcast, we always have to talk about food. I mean, we talked about food.
A lot about food.
Right, we did. I want to ask you, what is your favorite dish besides mofongo? Because we already know you love mofongo. So what is your favorite dish?
Oh, yeah, that's an easy one. Bistec encebollado con arroz blanco y habichuela, tostones, but my mother has to make it. Like every time I go back home, like I don't even have to tell her. She already knows that I want bistec encebollado. You can't get that anywhere out here, especially like out there where it's like cooked in between oil and vinegar, right? And then the onions get thrown on top. And it's kind of like weird because if you've cooked as much meat and stuff as I have, you already understand like searing and like the colors. And then that color is like gray, right? It's like not appealing at all, right? It's like you pickled it in a sense.
That's funny.
But it's so good. It's my favorite thing, and my mother makes it, and that would be my last meal if I had one.
That's actually my favorite too, so I have that in common with you. But I've tried like other people's, like in restaurants and stuff, and just nothing compares to when my mom makes it. And same thing, my mom makes it whenever I go back to New York. A lot of times she ends up making bistec encebollado for me too.
It's my favorite. It takes me back. I have a trip there in the upcoming weeks, and she already knows.
I'll have it ready for you too, Miguel, when you come to New York.
There.
I just want to say one joke, okay? Now, you guys got to make sure you laugh, okay? Okay, so I'm going to say a joke, and the joke is, where did my phone go? Mo-fon-go. Get it? Let me say it one more time. Where did my phone go?
Have you ever heard that one before?
Oh, yeah. Mo-fon-go. Where did Mo-fon-go? Try to see if you can get that. No, it's not funny.
Where did my phone go? Mo-fon-go. Yeah, I mean, you would, the amount of people that would send me that meme to like our mofongo page on a daily
Yeah.
basis was wild. You have to be cordial, just like, because, I've seen this 1,000 times and I'm like, okay, like, and people would come up to mofongo with the shirt that would say that
No
too.
way.
Oh, yeah. So I'm like, so I either have to like think about it like, oh, I've never heard this before because I don't want like, they took so much work into making this shirt, I want to downplay that.
So where can our listeners find you, Mofongo? I was going to call you
Mo-fon-go.
Where can our listeners find you, Manolo?
Definitely on social media. It's at manolo.jpeg, JPEG. You can follow Mofongo, that page too. It's inactive at the moment. We do post relevant stuff on Puerto Rico. So that's at MOFON period GO. Those are our pages and you can connect with me. I have a lot of different projects going on. We launched a short series with Donku in December, 4-episode short series on the history of rum. So we take people through the sugarcane fields in Coloso, which was the last one to close in the year 2000, which is the one in my town that I grew up in because we used to ride our ATVs and bikes through there. And then we go on to the distillery of Serrayes in Ponce and we speak to Silvia Santiago and we talk about the history of rum through the eyes of the first female master distiller. And then we go to La Factoria in Old San Juan, which is in the top 50 bars of the world. And we speak to my dear friend Leslie Cofresi about the challenges of having a business in Puerto Rico, but through the eyes of rum. So, we're always creating, regardless if food is always the medium. Food is always the conversation piece that I can bring to the table, and I always feel comfortable. Whether I talk about it, whether I cook it, whatever I do with it, it's the way that I'm able to express myself the best. So I think what's coming next is a lot of documenting, a lot of filming, and a lot of storytelling that has never been told in a way that you see it and then you're like, this is beautiful. This is the cinematography here, the thought process behind it, how it's written, how it's directed. And I'm getting more into that space right now. And we are going to Puerto Rico to start filming in the upcoming months for the second part of that series. So I'm very excited about being able to tell stories in Spanish and English that connect all people to Puerto Rico, and it brings the world closer to us.
I love it, Manolo. This is great. I'm so inspired now more with my business. Connecting culture for me is very important as well. Food and culture, history, traditions. It's very important.
But you have such an important job when everything with Coquilla Chef and like teaching the next generation, dicing, chopping, and I think that's very inspiring. That takes a certain degree of love and discipline and mostly patience. I remember I tuned in once and I think you were showing them how to make sofrito. And I thought this is the coolest thing ever, honestly.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me when you teach them how to make, for example, guacamole. And I'm from the South Bronx. I taught a lot of classes in the South Bronx. They never tasted an avocado before. So they had a lot of fun cutting, dicing, and then like mashing things together in the pilon. So it was a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us on this episode of More Than Rice and Beans. And a special thanks to Manolo Lopez for sharing his love for all things Puerto Rican. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to learn more about Puerto Rican dishes and cocktails, sign up for our Taste of Puerto Rico cooking classes at coquillachef.com. We'll see you here next time on More Than Rice and Beans.